For a while, I've been saying that the megapixel race is over. You just don't really need to worry about it anymore. And then Apple comes out with this.
A 48 megapixel camera?
48 megapixels, that's a lot. What are we gonna do with all those pixels that end up being a 12 megapixel image anyway? There's a lot to explain, a lot to figure out today. Apple has really differentiated the regular 14 and 14 Plus from the 14 Pro and the 14 Pro Max. More of a split between them than ever before, so maybe that's gonna make your choice harder or easier. I don't know, but it'll definitely make reviewing the phones harder because there are all these little details. So let's get into them, starting with the iPhone 14. There was a lot announced today. I'm gonna try to focus on things that pertain to photographers, and bigger screens definitely do. So there is now a 14 Plus, so you can get the larger screen option without spending all the money on the Pro. I think this makes a lot of sense, and I really hope Apple follows through with this on the MacBook Airs. I'd love to see bigger screens on those more affordable machines. The iPhone 14 does not have a new processor this year. It is the A15 all over again, and that's going to mostly be okay for performance. I mean, it was a fantastic processor ahead of most of the industry, but it's disappointing, especially from like a reviewer's perspective. I always liked being able to say, even if you don't need some of the Pro features, you're going to get all of the same performance, no matter which iPhone you choose. That's not going to be the case anymore. But they did make some upgrades to the camera system. There is a new main camera. It is still 12 megapixels. It has a larger sensor and larger pixels with a faster 1.5 aperture. Last year, it was 1.6. Apple says this will give us a 49% improvement in low light situations, which sounds pretty good. That's a pretty big number. It felt like they didn't hype up the camera improvements too much on the 14. I almost thought when I first watched the keynote that they didn't change it, but they did. That wide camera is much better. Unfortunately, the ultra wide is still the same camera as in the original iPhone 11. It seems like they haven't updated it at all, even though the Pro line has been getting updated year over year. The ultra wide has visibly worse quality than the regular wide, and it's kind of my favorite lens to use. Like, I love that lens, so seeing those improvements is really important to me, and it's too bad that it still hasn't reached the regular iPhone 14 models. But they did update the most important camera on the phone, which is of course the selfie camera. It's got a bit of a speed bump. The aperture has gone from 2.2 and now it is 1.9. It doesn't get enough attention, but it gets used a lot. So better selfie cameras make a difference for everybody. Also, they added autofocus to it. And my reaction when I saw that was, it didn't have autofocus? Like, when I take a selfie, I see a yellow square on my face. So I thought it was autofocusing. I guess it was just showing me where it was exposing the image. I'm not really actually sure. Anyway, now it definitely has autofocus. What Apple really wanted us to know is that they've made some big improvements to how the software is handling the photos. Their computational photography, their image pipeline has been improved. They talked a lot about their Photonic Engine. Now, as a photographer, I want to stick on this point just for a minute because it's actually quite a confusing term. I checked and it's not replacing Deep Fusion and it's not replacing Smart HDR, which are both already ways to describe their image pipeline. Usually they talk about their image signal processor and they didn't really use that term today. So I don't know, it really feels like they kind of had a marketing term of photonic floating around and applied it to the way that they're dealing with images so that it could have a bit of branding attached to it. I'd still like to know if it's categorizing a new feature or it's just a new term for the way Apple was already doing things, which has now been updated. So they said that there has been some big changes, especially to how Deep Fusion is working. It is now moved earlier into the pipeline so that it is being applied before the image is compressed. I'd love to see how these results come out. Deep Fusion has done really impressive things with kind of medium low light images. And it was strange because in the examples used in the keynote, these were actually daylight photos. So I'm not sure if maybe Deep Fusion will be applied to more images. Again, there's a bit of ambiguity around all this. I'd really like to clear it up. Whatever they call it, Apple's making some bold claims about it. They say that it's going to improve low light performance by 2x. I'm also a little bit confused about some of the math here. They're saying that the sensor size will improve it by 49%, and then the software improvements will improve it by 2 times. So is that like, are those multiplying together? That would be a lot of low light improvements. So I guess we'll find out when we test it. A new video feature that I'm expecting to be really useful is action mode. This is similar to what other cameras have been doing. So if you pick up a GoPro right now, it's going to have this really intense stabilization so it never looks like the camera's shaking. DJI action cameras, gimbals, like everything has strong stabilization now. Now Apple is doing their version and it looks intense. Like if you look at the sample footage they're showing, this guy running, the cameraman, I mean, he is going all over the place. So if this is a real example, like this is very strong stabilization. And whenever I see people out in the wild with a gimbal, even now with the stabilization built into an iPhone currently, I'm like, you don't really need a gimbal for it. It is very stable. Now you really don't need a gimbal, even if you're running. And it is worth knowing that it does seem to crop the image a little bit, so it shoots up to 2.8K instead of 4K. I don't think that's a big compromise. All of the stabilization software needs to crop in a little bit, so no big deal. And by the way, did you see the Apple Watch Ultra? Because I don't do anything that would deserve that powerful of a watch, but it looks great and I want one, or I at least want some of those straps because they look awesome. And those are all my notes on the regular 14, so let's get to the really exciting stuff. 14 Pro. Also, did you notice the AirPods Pro? Because those are my actual like most used other gadget other than my phone. So seeing them updated, it's personally very exciting. Once you've decided if you want to upgrade to the iPhone 14, you're going to need a great case to protect it. Let me recommend Casetify, the sponsor of this video. They sent me a few of their brand new case designs to try out, and if you've seen my iPhone 13 video, then you've already seen the basic design here, but there have been some upgrades. They also sent me a fake iPhone 14, just, to give it some weight, feel what this is going to be like. In this latest generation, Casetify has updated their EcoShock technology. They say that it's now increased protection by 20% while still making it thinner and lighter. They tweaked their tension distribution so impact is dispersed more evenly and also making it more abrasion resistant. This increased the drop height that it can survive. They're saying up to 5 times military standard, meaning that it can survive up to 130 drop tests without losing any of its protective properties. Their iPhone 14 cases are made of 65% recycled and plant-based materials and are also partly upcycled from old phone cases. If you think you might drop your phone from even more than 8.2 feet, they also have an ultra impact case and bounce case, so you can go all the way up to 21.3 feet of protection. You can also protect the most fragile parts of your phone with the screen and camera protectors. And now Casetify has more designs than ever before from tons of diverse artists. They have MagSafe versions that are compatible with all your MagSafe accessories. Just hit the link below, play with some of their customization options. That's casetify.com/Tyler Stalman to get 15% off your order. Thanks again to Casetify for sponsoring this video. If you take your photography or your filmmaking seriously, like you really care about it and you put money into it, this year you're really gonna want the iPhone 14 Pro or Pro Max. They've put the new A16 Bionic processor into it for one thing. So typically that is in both the regular phones and the Pro phones, and now it is just the Pros. And in addition to our usual year-over-year spec bump, this is also enabling the always-on display and some of the camera system updates. The main camera on the Pro is now 48 megapixels. This has always been a little bit weird to me in these smaller sensors because I have a Canon R5, for example. It's a little bit less than 48 megapixels. Like, that is a lot of pixels and crammed into a very small space. So Apple is doing what I think is the right thing with those pixels and binning them, putting them together into a final 12 megapixel image. So it's using all of the available light and all the available detail and making some intelligent decisions about the best possible way to show you that final image. But it's not only more pixels, it's also a bigger sensor. Apple says it's 65% bigger. It feels like year over year they keep telling us how much bigger it is, and like, eventually it's just going to be like our bigger cameras, which is great. This is more important to me actually than the amount of pixels. It's much harder to predict image quality based on the number of pixels than the size of the sensor. That is much more reliable that you're going to get a great image. So most of the time, I'm going to still be shooting these 12 megapixel images. You can shoot the 48 megapixel RAW image with Apple Pro RAW. I mean, this is going to give you the maximum editing flexibility, maximum sharpness, all these things, but you'll have to deal with a little bit more noise and processing in the end, but it might be worth it if that's your workflow. Also, the files are going to be enormous. They're like 50 megabytes per Apple Pro RAW image. So make sure that that's what you need before switching over to it. Another huge change to me that sounds small is the lens is now 24 millimeters instead of 26 millimeters. That might sound like a very small change, 2 millimeters different, but for a photographer or filmmaker, it is a lot. In fact, I can show you exactly how much it is. So this is 26 megapixels and this is 24. It is quite different when you're trying to frame something up and gives you a lot more room. So it's not better, like wider isn't better, it just is a different set of choices. So the interesting thing here is that now the range between Apple's wide lens and their telephoto lens is 24 to 77, which 24 to 70 is my most commonly used lens. That's what's on my camera all the time. And that's now what's on my iPhone. That 3 times telephoto lens has not been updated this year, which is too bad because it's the one that a lot of people complain about the most. It's visibly softer, it's slower, like it's not the best lens on the camera system, but I've been using it more and more. Like I've been using it a lot lately. So I enjoy it actually. It hasn't really been a problem, but it would be nice to see it have a bump because I don't want to be in a place where depending which lens you choose on your iPhone, the images come out in radically different quality levels. They should basically all look the same. And I think we're going to have the biggest difference we've ever had, especially between the wide and the telephoto. Obviously, Apple's been hearing this too. So they have enabled a 2 times option, which is cropping into that 48 megapixel sensor from the wide lens. I want to see how this turns out. I have a feeling it's not really going to look better than the telephoto, but we'll see. It's a smart thing to do if they can really make it look better than cropping the old sensor. It'll probably be worth it for a lot of people and they may not even notice what's happening. But there is an update on the ultra-wide lens. I think this has changed iPhone photography the most. I love this lens, so I'm glad to see them moving it forward on the Pro models. So the upgrade path has been a little bit weird. When it was introduced on the iPhone 11, it was an f2.4 lens. Then they made it a 1.7 as an upgrade. It was faster. Now they're upgrading it to a 2.2. So it's becoming a slower lens, and their hope is that this is different enough that it will make it a lot sharper. And I don't really know what those differences will be. I mean, not all lenses are better just because they have a faster aperture. So we really need to actually test this to see if the improvements are worth it. I really hope they are because I love that ultra wide. And this was another place Apple mentioned their Photonic Engine, the software processing, saying it'll be 3 times better in low light. Sounds great. The proof is in the testing. The flash has also been improved. They say that on the telephoto, it is now twice as bright, and on the ultra wide, it is twice as uniform. Now for video, well, they didn't do 8K, which I'm glad. I don't shoot 8K anything. I find it's just the file sizes are just so big and unwieldy and nobody can really perceive the difference between 4K and 8K anyway. If you don't already know, I mean, it's mostly a way of capturing the highest quality footage. And then if you need to crop in or do digital effects or whatever, you've got more data. Phones, I'm not convinced they really need that for most scenarios. But cinematic mode did get 4K, which is a nice upgrade. It can only do 1080 last year, and it can also shoot in 24 frames per second. That was something I specifically was complaining about. I'll also say since last year, I didn't end up shooting in cinematic mode much at all. Mostly it's just that the cutouts around the sides are too visible. Like I do see the difference, and I just kind of forget that it's there. I don't know, it still looks cool, but I just don't turn it on very often. Another huge update on the Pro models is the display. If you have seen their display island, this is how they morphed the notch into an interface item. Now, when I first saw leaks of this little pill shape, I was ready to diss it in this video. I was like, I don't think that looks better. I think it's a downgrade. Like the notch is not any worse than this. But then I saw what they did in software. And I love it. I mean, it just makes it feel like part of the interface. It brings the physical phone and the software of the phone together in a really organic and interesting way. And I instantly fell in love with it. And now I think it's better than the notch. Now, Apple's done a lot of work on the brightness of this phone. It is 1000 nits in typical viewing environments. That's usually going to be what you see. And it can go up to 1600 nits in HDR environments. So that's what the brightest part of the screen is going to look like. That is up from 1200 nits last year. Now the big jump is outdoors. It can go to 2000 nits. These are specs that I'd pay a lot more money for in the professional monitors we use in film production. This is like a very professional feature. The only thing is that it is not sustained everywhere. So you're not gonna be able to walk outside and keep it that bright for a long time. And it doesn't address my biggest problem with the brightness of the phone, which is cooling. Anytime that I leave it on for a while outside, it overheats and it goes really dim and it drives me crazy. I mean, maybe I just need a case that has a lot of fans on it. I don't know if Apple's ever going to fix that, but they are making it as bright and beautiful as possible. Now, the display also can go down to 1 Hertz, meaning it refreshes not very often and allows for the always on display. If you haven't already taken a look at iOS 16, there's a lot of great new options for wallpapers and the way you can customize your photography and stuff, so it's going to fit in perfectly for that. And one feature I don't like that's coming to all the iPhones is eSIM. I mean, it's a great feature. It was already there, but I didn't use it. I like having a physical SIM, especially because it means if a phone breaks or I just need to quickly switch phones, I can physically move a card back and forth. I feel like it's a bit of a step backwards to lose that. I'm not really surprised Apple went there. They don't like having physical ports of any kind, but I liked SIM cards. So that's a lot of good news for photographers. The one thing I didn't hear Apple mention is making AirDrop work 100% of the time, because I use it so reliably. It's such a big part of photo workflows and being on set that everybody can pass photos around, and it doesn't work at least 30% of the time, which is too often. So Apple, please get on top of that. And if you want to see the reviews of the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro, stay tuned, subscribe, and if you want to learn how to edit vertical videos, watch that tutorial by clicking here. I'll see you guys in the next video.